Okay, we're going to talk about chapter 6 in the book. I also wanted to mention about the exam for this class real quick. So the exam is going to be a mixture of questions, and I just updated the syllabus with this, so I thought I would go ahead and mention what it's about. So Google's being a little slow today. So the final exam is going to be based on comprehensive across the course, as I mentioned before. You're going to have at least a week. It will be untimed open notes. You have at least 1 week to complete it in iLearn. It's going to cover all 3 books. Okay? But most likely, it's going to be based primarily on the 2 little books. Okay? These 2 here, not the textbook, which is a little dated in material, but at the time that I had to choose it for the course, it was the only book available for the course. Now there's a new book from a completely different publisher, which I think is going to be much better for future courses. But this particular class, we were kind of forced to use a book that's for PhDs, which is why there's a lot of things that are probably above most people's heads. But it's also a book that we've had to use here in the business school because there is no other book on the subject matter. So we're going to focus on those 2 books, which should make it a little easier for you to have for the exam. That being said, there will be 40 multiple choice questions, each worth half a point for 20 points total. And then 2 short answer essay questions worth 5 points total for each one of those. So that'll be 10 total. Combined, that's 30 points. There may also be some extra credit points on the exam. Okay. So aside from medical reasons, and you need to talk to me as soon as you can about that, there will be documentation required. There will be no late submissions of the exam. Okay, so I wanted to cover that real quick. So with that, let's go ahead and talk about chapter 6 of the textbook and try to wrap this up as quickly as we can. So chapter 6 is all about production of information. So when we produce information, it's very costly, but reproducing that information is extremely cheap. Now, publishing a book, obviously there's physical aspects, so there is some cost there. But when we talk about electronic information, the net cost of producing additional copies is negligible or nothing at all, depending on the situation. Okay, and we see this, and this is often a justification. So I mentioned a little bit about intellectual property in this class, but this is oftentimes what I've heard in my career and from students of why some people think it's okay. I don't think it's okay, but why some people think it's okay to copy a movie, a book, music, a game, software, whatever it might be. Well, it doesn't cost the company anything if I do that. But the reality is that information does cost the company in terms of revenue sharing with the original person who created it. You're impacting the artists who star in movies, who create the songs. That's their livelihood. So there is a cost associated with it from that perspective. But in terms of what does it take to reproduce, say, the book that's sitting on my iPad here, okay? What does it cost to reproduce this and distribute it? Well, that's negligible cost, right? So just something to think about. Okay? Let's see here. Now we could conceivably try to free ride on what others produce, but that also has a negative effect when we think about our own information being written. And you think about it from the perspective as a student. If you work your ass off to produce a paper and you spend a ton of time on it, doing the research, writing the paper, how would you feel if your professor took that paper and gave it to another student and let them present that work as their own? You wouldn't be okay with that. But some of you might go and give it to someone else. Well, that's a free ride for someone else. If you did all that work, why should you let someone free ride on you? Okay? If we legitimately fear that, all we're going to do is have someone free ride on us if we produce information and make it available, then we discourage people from actually creating information. Okay? So we might end up with no information produced at all. Or on the opposite extreme, we might have people so prone to protecting information that they will go and file patents and copyrights and things like that to protect the information. And now we have no free access to that information whatsoever. Okay? So we have these extremes where we have organizations who might produce something and patent it, and only that organization gets the benefit of the information. And I think about, back in the day, there used to be compilations of information in the form of encyclopedias. And initially, these were large books like you see on my bookshelf back there. Okay? Initially, there were things like that. But then they became CDs. Okay? And these CDs contain compilations of information. And if you wanted to access information, you had to have the CD. And so you had to spend a lot of money for encyclopedias to get knowledge. Well, today, I'm sure that there are still encyclopedias being published. I don't know of anybody who has them in their home other than, my grandmother's not around anymore, but her home in Michigan had some encyclopedias on the shelf. But in this day and age, we don't get our information out of encyclopedias that are printed usually. And so that information is freely available to us. We have things like Wikipedia, not always the most reliable source, mind you, but we do have a lot of free information sources available to us. Okay? And if you think about some of the information you have access to in college, you have access to databases of information that is not free. It costs the university a lot of money to maintain those resources for you to use. Those resources then are, the costs are sometimes passed along to you in the form of tuition. So if that information were free, perhaps, your tuition costs might be lower. I don't know. But certainly the cost to the university would be lower in terms of the library acquiring these materials. So there is a benefit to having free access to that information, but there has to be a balance between the two extremes. Okay? If we end up, avoiding those two extremes, that's a great thing for us. But let's just say we go down the approach of it's free ridden, so we end up with very little research in that area. Okay? And if it's the opposite end where it's very patent driven, there can be too much research and it's not super relevant. Okay? So deviations between these two extremes can cause economic growth issues. Okay? Can actually hurt our economic growth as a society. So the production of information, R&D, research and development, that is a key area of growth for us economically. And so we produce information from R&D, and if you look at, just as an example, UCR is constantly doing research and development. Now, is this generally being done at the undergraduate level? There is some R&D being done at the undergraduate level, but generally this is being done in the master's and doctorate programs on the campus. That R&D helps fund programs on the university, and it's driving the development of information which benefits society as a whole. So there can be a huge amount of economic growth tied to the production of that information. And so if you're very interested in this topic, I really encourage you to look at some of the entrepreneurship programs on the campus. They are working with professors who are doing research. Now, I know I'm going to get asked this question, I always do. I don't do any research on the campus, so I'm not involved in research at all. I don't know who's doing research. But if there is an area that you're interested in doing research in, you should talk to a faculty member in that particular area. So in the business school, you should talk to a tenured faculty member. They're required to do research. Okay, so the only professor I can think of off the top of my head, actually there's two professors, Professor Lim, and Professor Riccio. So those are the two that I can think of offhand. You might say, hey, what kind of research are you doing? Is there anything that I can do? So there's research ongoing at the graduate level within the School of Business, the School of Medicine, the College of Natural and Agricultural Sciences, the College of Humanities, Arts, and Social Sciences, and then, of course, the College of Engineering, as well as the School of Public Policy. So there's a lot of different areas where you could potentially dip your toes into some research and help generate that information. You can also do the same thing as part of, going into a graduate program that can help to drive information and new research, and that information that is generated can lead to practical applications that can drive further economic growth. So we look at some of the things that the university's done specifically. I can give you a few examples. Number one, the CNAS has worked on in the genetics realm with respect to citrus trees. And so they've done research that allowed them to patent strains of trees that are disease resistant. And so if anybody wants to grow those trees, they pay a licensing fee to the university. That is recurring money that comes into the university to further fund the development of new information. So you can see where this benefit to society as a whole has a compounding effect over time. And some of that information we protect with a patent because we think there might be commercial value to it. And some information we might determine that there's not immediate commercial value to the information. It's more valuable to society as a whole if we open it up. So we open it up, that drives more innovation, more research and development into areas that might lead to patentable technologies that we can then use that information to drive revenue for the organization. So in the business world, we go through these assessments of looking at something that we've created. Is it something that we want to patent and drive revenue from? Or do we want to release it publicly, let the world as a whole share in that knowledge, and then that will open up new markets for ourselves as well as other organizations? And so I will use an example out of my own life. I worked for Oracle Corporation, and they're a big software firm, and they've got patents galore, just like any other software company does. And we have a patent application that's out there publicly. It's on my LinkedIn. You'd find it if you look for it, for something that we determined might have future commercial value. And so by potentially having future commercial value, the company decided to file a patent. Now that patent would give them exclusive rights to that invention, the information, the invention. The benefit for society as a whole, though, is with a patent is you file it and you have to disclose your invention. Now, if anybody uses your invention, you can ask for licensing revenue. Okay, so you can license the technology to them so they can use your patent. If they don't license it, they can't use it, but it helps to expand that broad knowledge. So if you're really geeky and really interested in this sort of thing, Google has a patent search. You can go out and search for things. Okay, it's just like the Google search engine, except it's specific to patents. Okay, so just Google, Google patent search, and you can. Well, let me show you real quick. Let me just show you real quick. Okay, try to make this a little bit more interactive than usual. So let's go ahead and transfer here. Okay. Well, here's mine. Happens to be in my search history here. Okay. So all of us can go out and we can get the benefit of these different patent filings. Oh, there it goes. All right. So anybody can go out and look at this page. Sorry, it's going to take a second to reload. So anyone can come out, read the abstract, look at the images, read the details, okay, of what this is about. Okay? And it's actually relevant to right now, has to do with voting. Okay, but anyhow, folks can go out and they can go do their own inventions and do their own patents. And you can see this particular invention has been cited by another invention. Okay? So it's been cited by the examiner. So the examiner says, well, in coming up with this particular patent, there's some sort of relationship. I won't even try to pretend to know what the relationship is, with this particular patent. So this particular patent cites it, just like mine here cites these here. Now, I didn't go and find these. Either the patent examiner or the lawyer who did this application for me found those, okay? And then you can go through and you can see any of the details about the particular patent. This takes a long time, by the way, so patents can take a long time from the time that you file it to the time that it actually becomes public. It takes 2 years to become public, and then it can take years after that to actually get the patent prosecuted and accepted. So right now, the status is it's an application, it's ready for examination, it's gone back and forth with the patent examiner, okay? You can go out and let's just look at some of these other ones out here just so you can see, some of the examples of patents out there. Let's use this one because this one's actually been granted, okay? So in this case, here's this person's patent. It's been granted, it's been published, and it's now an active patent, okay? And you can see that, patent filing is you've got to have diagrams, you've got to have a lot of information that explains it because you want someone to be able to go and figure out how to do this particular invention and build it, okay? So patent is one way for us to exchange information. And if you go out to the Google patent search, you can go out and search for, I don't know, iPhone. I'm sure there's going to be lots of different patents here for things related to the iPhone, okay? And we can go out and we can search on things. But anyways, the point of this is that you can go out and you can see information, and this is freely available for you. You just have to wait the 2 years from the time it's initially published in order to see it. So now others can learn from what has been produced and use that to do improvements to technologies and processes and things like that, okay? But if we use someone else's patent, we have to then do a license. So it now has some sort of monetary value that we can generate revenue from. We can either sell things based on that patent ourselves or license the patent to others or do both, okay? And so patents is a big business for marketing information, selling it, okay? Now, let's move on. So when we talk about like economic growth in general, only a small portion of that growth is due to improving the capital to labor ratio. The way that we actually generate growth in terms of our economy is technical progress, okay, as well as improved education of our labor force. It's not work harder, it's work smarter, okay? So when our people can work smarter, we can improve the technologies available, we improve our economic productivity as an organization or as a economy as a whole in terms of a country or the world economy, looking broader than that. So if we fail to innovate, okay, and we just look at improving the productivity of our workers, we're not going to grow economically as much as we could if we really focused on innovation. And innovation is driven by the production of new information from that research and development activity, okay? Now, inventions are one thing, but they're only effective if we actually implement them, okay? So let's use an example, okay? A far-fetched example that it's just theoretical at this point. Let's just say that tomorrow, NASA announces a scientist has figured out how to travel faster than the speed of light, okay? And they've invented that. Even though that's an invention, the only way that's going to be effective for us is if we can actually do something to implement that, okay? So right now, faster than light travel is purely theoretical. There, have been some studies in recent years of, proposed solutions to that problem, but at its fundamental core, that is still a theoretical problem. and until we actually do some sort of practical application, we aren't actually going to have an effective invention there. Okay. Now, taking a step back, let's look at something that exists today, but let's kind of keep it in the same realm. So let's just say that yesterday, someone figured out how to travel up into space. I know it didn't happen yesterday, but let's just say someone figured out how to travel up into space. And today, I think it was today, there was a rocket launch, okay? We now have an implemented invention, and so there's some value to that particular invention, some economic value. That economic value in the very beginning may not be huge, right? But over time, that can drive huge increases to our productivity, huge increases to technologies that went into that rocket. And so not only can the rocket and space travel now become an industry that drives economic growth, but let's just say that as part of that process, we developed a new polymer, or we developed a new carbon fiber nanomaterial that has strength, and it can be used at high temperatures. And suddenly this leads to the ability to sustain a fusion reaction in a fusion generator. So now we can sustain a fusion reaction, make it cost effective. Now we've got a new power source. That power source could lead to additional economic growth. So it becomes a compounding factor. If we look at things like even the iPhone, tablets, these didn't exist 20 years ago. Okay, even it was about 13 years ago the iPhone came out, and only about 9 years ago that the iPad came out. These created entirely new areas of computing and led to growth. Okay? If these didn't exist, I don't think as many people would be on the internet, because a laptop is not, or a desktop is not going to be functional for a lot of people. There are a lot of people who don't use regular computers, but a tablet is great for them. Okay? An iPhone or an Android phone are perfect for them. Okay? So there's a lot of really cool things that can drive the economic growth, and this all starts with the information from those research and development opportunities. Okay? Entrepreneurs are key to all of this. We certainly, you can see this sort of thing come from established organizations, but we don't see the level of growth that we do like when we have entrepreneurship. So there's a really great class that UC offers called Technology Entrepreneurship. You should take it. Professor Yo and myself usually teach that particular course, and I think it's a really fun course to take and learn about startups and what it's like to come up with an idea and start your own business. Entrepreneurship is the lifeblood of not only the United States, but also a lot of countries around the world. Where you see countries that stagnate and they don't invent things and they don't come up with new ideas, they suffer economically. Okay? So when you have that culture of entrepreneurship, you can really grow economically. Okay? All right, let's just move on to next piece. So in terms of moving on with respect to information, so we have to think strategically. Are we going to make or buy what we need in a business in terms of information? So are we going to go and come up with this information ourselves, or are we going to buy information? So is that, boils down to, are we going to research things ourselves, or are we going to have someone else do the research for us? Okay? And so the most successful organizations go out and they do, I should say, successful and sustainable organizations do research and development on their own. They may not build it themselves. They might outsource the actual building, but the development of those technologies end up being more effective if you build it yourselves rather than going out and acquiring that from someone else who does the research for you. And a great example of that might be Apple or IBM. They have huge R&D organizations who develop things within their own organization. Okay? I use Oracle as an example as well of both sides of the coin. So in some respects, Oracle does do a significant amount of R&D in certain areas, but in other areas they just go out and acquire companies. So you've got a double-edged sword here of you can do a really great job of research and development in certain areas, but then because you're not great in other areas, you have to go out and buy it. And so Oracle's done that, and with mixed results, really. I mean, if you look at some of the acquisitions in the cloud space, they were big failures, and I don't think they really got any economic value out of some of those acquisitions. Okay, whereas other acquisitions, they were able to get some sort of value for their business. So you've got to think about this sort of thing within your organization as well. Okay. An example that the book has around economics of information production and selling is credit ratings. Okay? So the credit ratings industry, they're basically just selling information based on information produced by others. They're just collecting it together into one place, analyzing it, and then providing you with that rating. Okay? So that's an example of going out and just pulling the raw data from other places. Okay? Let's see here. The allocation of whether you do a build or make versus buy, so that's more it's build, make, produce versus buy or reproduce decision. It really depends on the property rights. Okay? And we talked about property rights of things like patents, copyrights, trademarks, and trade secret. Okay? So we have to think about, is there something patentable here? And if there's something patentable or something that we can trademark, something we can get a copyright on, then maybe it makes sense for us to go out and produce the information. Otherwise, maybe it's better for us to just go obtain the information elsewhere. Okay? Patent laws. Okay? Not a class about patents, but patents are a form of a way to monetize information. Okay? Patent laws have actually been around since the very beginning. Okay? And so the US patent system has been around almost as long as the country's been around. Okay? All right. Let's move on. You can look, there's some examples of different types of patent systems, but we'll move on from there. Okay. All right. Free writing on information. So information, we talked about, it can be produced, it can be reproduced, copied, or learned. Okay. So let's look at the example of, say, a weather forecast. We can produce it by doing our own research. Okay. Or we can just reproduce the information by buying it from someone else. Okay? So you and I, if we're going to produce weather information, we're going to have to go and set up a bunch of equipment to do experiments and gather data. Okay? Or we can just go buy a subscription to the Weather Channel and get the weather information that way. Two different approaches. One is going to be a substantial investment for us and probably is not going to pay off if we're going to go produce information like that. Probably not going to pay off for us individually. But it might be more cost effective if we're a large organization and we want to provide a better service to our customers or something. Okay? So there are organizations that go down that path. The Weather Channel is an example. They could have purchased that information from somewhere else, but instead they developed their own technologies to do accurate weather predictions and things like that. So they did a lot of research and development to produce information, and they split off the Weather Channel itself from the Weather Company, I think it's called. The Weather Company is the technology and information arm. That's where the real money is. The information is not on the television side or even the internet website side. Okay? That's not where the real money is. So those two entities license the information from the technology company, which is now owned by, IBM or something like that now. Okay, so you could go down that approach. Alternatively, You could get your weather data from the National Weather Service, a free source. Get it from the government, and that's what other entities do. Other TV stations, they might get it from the Weather Channel and pay for it, or they might just get it for free from the National Weather Service. Okay. All right. With respect to R&D, some researchers will try to keep their findings secret. Okay. Secrecy can work. It's trade secrets is where that fits into from a protection standpoint. But it does have a drawback from society's view because we don't benefit from that knowledge. Okay? So that is one drawback to being secretive. So there are some organizations who are very secretive about things, very patent-driven, very litigation-driven. And then there are organizations who are much more free with information. And I'll use software as an example. Software is a form of information. Okay? Open source software is all about freedom. Okay? Freedom, you can take it, you can learn from it, you can copy it, you can redistribute it. Okay? With closed source software, on the other hand, it's secretive. Windows is a great example. Microsoft Office, another example. That is proprietary to Microsoft. It's a trade secret. They don't want it getting out. And so nobody values from having access to that source code, although honestly, from my perspective, I don't know that it's super valuable. It's not the greatest operating system from my perspective. But if we look at something else, say Linux. Linux is an open source operating system. And so the public benefits from that. There are constant innovations happening. You're not waiting for a vendor. Anybody can fork the Linux project and build their own version of Linux. Okay? And so people do. They take Linux and they bundle it up and they make it their own distribution. So scientists have their own distributions, and there's the Red Hat flavors and the Debian-based flavors, and there's Ubuntu, and Amazon has their own Linux, etc. So there's a lot of ability to go and target based on what you learn. And not only that, you'd be able to roll other findings that people have. So if someone discovers a security bug in a piece of open software, well then guess what? The whole public benefits from that because now everybody's aware of the security issue that was found. It's fixed and it's pushed out. You don't have to wait on a vendor. So that is, advantage of having an open development model for that information. Okay. Now, if we take information and we keep it secret, or we use a patent, that does prevent free writing on the information. But there is a disadvantage to this. I told you it takes a couple of years to just get the patent published publicly, and then it can take years longer to get that innovation out there. And in the meantime, you can't go out and really market the details until that period of publishing the patent happens. It's difficult for you to go out and talk about what you built. And then it's also possible that by the time that you do that, someone's already leapfrogged the technology you've come up with. So you've spent all this time keeping it secret, and then it's an irrelevant technology. And there's a lot of examples of that sort of thing. Let's just say that I'm a disk drive manufacturer, okay? We've largely moved to solid state drives or memory chips. Matter of fact, I have an example to show on my desk here. This is my new hard drive for my computer over there on my little server. It's a solid state stick of memory for a hard drive. So if I can have this and it's fast, much faster than my hard drive could ever be, a physical spinning disk, what benefit would a patent on a new type of hard drive that spins faster be if it can't compete with that type of memory? And there are plenty of examples of companies going out trying to create something and they completely miss the boat. To use an example, floppy disk. Okay. If all I can think about is floppy disk, I know this is really old and many of you have probably never seen a floppy disk or even know what I'm talking about. But before hard disk and before SSD drives and before DVDs and CD-ROM drives, we had floppy disk. Okay. And some of them were literally floppy not quite, but this, floppy is this piece of paper almost. Okay? Some of them were more rigid, like my phone. Okay? And then some of them were very low capacity, and then some had a bit higher capacity. And so rather than reinventing, some of the manufacturers of floppy disks loved the cash cow of selling floppy disks because they would go bad, you needed a lot of them. They made a lot of money selling these things. So whereas some organizations said, hey, you know what, let's come up with a better way to do storage. And so we started having hard drives. Okay. Other companies said, no, I'm just going to add more capacity to a floppy disk. So, we went from, I think, like 400K to 720K to 1.4. And that was kind of the standard, 1.4, 1.44. But then people got a little crazy about it and started doing 20 meg floppies, 40 meg floppies of these weird formats that weren't consistent. And, perhaps find patents of that sort of thing. We started having things like the zip drive, which was basically removable media that was like a floppy drive that held 100 megs. And then there were some bigger ones. And the company that built the zip drive was at its peak very popular. Everybody had a zip drive in their computer or attached to their computer. And that's how you transferred files back and forth before the internet was popular. And that's how I did it in college, was a zip drive. But they missed the boat because hard drives became higher capacity, much lower cost. And in the meantime, people were thinking of brand new things like CD-ROMs and DVD-ROMs. And then a lot of companies stuck with those and were trying to, reinvent those, more capacity in those. But then some people said, why the hell are we thinking about this sort of thing? Why do we have to have movable media? Why can't we make memory cheaper and rewritable? So that's where we started seeing SD cards and USB sticks and, now eventually these SSD drives and these little NVRAM cards that we can put in our computers. That's all innovation that happened, but those companies, some of them stuck with hard drives, some of them stuck with floppy drives, CD drives, DVD drives, and tried to improve on those. Those companies are largely not in business, or they have been merged with other companies. But some of these organizations are still hung up on those old technologies. They have not reinvented themselves. Okay? And so patents can lead to people falling behind, or businesses falling behind, because they're so reliant on that patent. And by the time the patent gets issued, they're not going to make any money because it's technology nobody needs. Okay? All right. So why is information sometimes underproduced and sometimes overproduced? It's because there are two different public goods involved here. One is the stock of publicly accessible information that we've already found, and the other is the knowledge that we have yet to discover. Okay? So there's a lot of information that we already know, and there's a lot of information that we have to discover yet. Okay? Now, if information is a public good, then we would have too little private research. But at the same time, if there's limited public pool of ideas to be discovered, then the research is likely to be excessive. And we're going to have everybody researching. So we have to have a balance between the two. We have to have a strong public knowledge market as well as a strong need for private research. Okay? And so I think we are in a good place with that in terms of, I think that we've achieved a nice balance in terms of we've got universities and businesses who are investing in private information, and some of those then allow that to become public, while others go after the patent route. If everybody went after patents, I think that would be bad. If everybody went for the public route, that would be bad. But we've got these two different pieces. And we also have this proliferation of publicly available information. So I can search Google and look at the patents. It's easily accessible to me. It used to be that you'd have to go hire a lawyer who could go do a patent search for you. And even before the patent searches, they'd actually have to go to a library and do a patent search. Okay? Or go out to Washington, D.C. and go to the patent office to do a patent search. So we've really improved access to the information, and the internet has really helped achieve that. You know, there have been systems before the internet for finding information. France is actually an innovator in this area, although, you know, an example of kind of going down a path and then when other technologies are available, being a little slow to adapt. But the French had a little desktop device you could use. I can't remember what it's called. Mytel or something like that. I don't remember exactly. But anyways, they had this device for finding information. Okay? And it allowed you to use your phone to pull up information, and potentially very helpful. When I was a kid, we barely had modems. When I was a really little kid, it was, you know, they didn't even have that. But by the time I was in high school, we had internet access, some of us, and, you know, we mostly got on through things like AOL, Prodigy, CompuServe, those types of systems. But that started allowing us to have access to information. The internet just kept expanding that, so the amount of information on the internet just expands exponentially. Now, there's a lot of useless garbage on the internet, but there's also a lot of very helpful information. You just have to find it. All right. So we're going to skip over the section on the theory to innovate. That's for PhD programs. So we're going to skip over that section, okay, and move on. And let's talk about information. Let's talk about information as a public good. Okay. So information is not only cheap for us to reproduce, the owner of a piece of information will often find it difficult or maybe even impossible to exclude others from reproducing that information. So we can take actions to try to prevent this type of copies, you know, but some things we can't do. So let's use an example: broadcast TV. Okay? If we broadcast that information, several people can access that information at no cost. We don't really have a good way to restrict access to that. That's a public good. Okay? There have been attempts, and those attempts are things like cable TV, satellite TV. Okay? We can restrict access in that manner. Okay? But there have always been ways that people find to circumvent that. You know, back in the days of cable TV, there were people who were able to pull the cable TV down using devices, okay, to pull it down illegally. Same thing with satellite TV. That's another example of people have been able to work around that. Streaming services, today's modern day equivalent. Again, there are people who have been able to, you know, counteract that. The copy protection in movies, music, etc. Again, people have circumvented that. That's illegal, by the way. You get caught doing it, not only is it a civil offense, it's a criminal offense under the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, and you'll probably have the FBI knocking on your door, but you could probably do it. I'm sure you can find places that tell you how to do it. Wouldn't recommend it unless you want your friends to visit you in jail. Okay? But we can have public goods. Okay. Let's see here. Let's just move on and talk about research as a public right. Okay. So there's an exhaustible pool of inventions. If we have excessive information production because everybody is researching, this is like us having too many fish that we've discovered, and we're not able to fish them all. Okay? So we want to make sure that we have a sufficient number of fish to go after, but it's only helpful if we, you know, we're not, you know, constantly having too many fish that we can go after. We can't possibly know and understand everything that's out there. Okay. And let's go ahead and see here. I think that's good for this particular chapter. I wouldn't worry about the rest of the unit. We're not going to cover that on the exam, so you don't need to worry about that. Okay? And so that's it for now. And just a couple of other quick announcements. In addition to the exam details being posted in the syllabus, I did post the case study information. Everything you need for that is out there. Please don't overthink the assignment. Read the instructions. Don't overthink it. Just follow the directions that are out there. Okay. And then I also made sure to post the last discussions as well. So your discussions are posted for you to review when the time comes.